Picture this. A man approaches a highly respected, like a revolutionary spiritual teacher.
Right.
And this man is eager. He's ready to dedicate his entire life to a new path. But first, he has this completely reasonable, universally understood request.
Yeah, a very normal thing to ask.
Exactly. He says, "Lord, first let me go and bury my father." It's a moment of deep vulnerability. And instead of offering condolences or, I don't know, a comforting hand on the shoulder, the teacher looks at him and delivers what sounds like a verbal slap in the face.
He really does.
He says, "Follow me and let the dead bury their own dead."
I mean, it is arguably one of the most jarring, culturally offensive things you could possibly say in the ancient world.
Totally.
You are taking the ultimate sacred duty, honoring a deceased parent, and effectively telling a grieving son to just abandon it. It completely shatters every standard expectation we have about, empathy, family loyalty, basic human decency.
Yeah, I'm still reeling from it just reading it because we expect ancient spiritual texts to offer, like poetic wisdom, right?
Yeah.
The kind of gentle guidance you might stitch onto a throw pillow or something.
Right, yeah, the coffee mug versus...
Exactly. But this phrase, which is from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 8, verse 22, and Luke 9.60, it sounds more like a riddle wrapped in a devastatingly harsh rebuke.
And that shock value is entirely the point. I mean, to understand why such an aggressive command was given, we really have to recognize that we are looking at this through a modern, usually Western lens.
Oh, for sure.
When you filter this single phrase through the cultural and linguistic kaleidoscope of the ancient Middle East, it stops being a cruel dismissal. It transforms into a really profound diagnosis of the human condition.
And to do that, to actually see that transformation, we are leaning heavily today on a deeply researched theological paper. It's by an author named Frank Leo.
Yes, a really fascinating piece of work.
And even just looking at the author's byline tells you we're in for a wild ride with this deep dive. Because he doesn't just represent one viewpoint. He lists his name across 3 entirely different linguistic traditions.
Which is incredible.
Right. It's Frank Leo, or Lu Zongtang in Chinese, Moshe Halevi, or Moshe Levin in Hebrew, and Franciscus Moses Levitakis in Greek.
That byline alone is kind of the perfect visual for what this deep dive requires of us. I mean, you simply cannot decode a 2,000-year-old paradox by just looking at a modern English translation.
No, you definitely miss a lot.
You need a bridge between cultures. And the research here pulls from Greek, Syriac, Hebrew, and Coptic traditions to really reconstruct the multidimensional reality of what was actually happening in that conversation.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we get into the heavy spiritual metaphors, I really want to look at the raw language. Reading a phrase like this in English is kind of like looking at a black and white photocopy of an oil painting.
That's a good way to put it.
You can see the outline, but you are just missing all the vivid color and texture.
So let's add the color back in. Let's start with the original Koine Greek of Matthew 8.22. The text reads, Akolou te moi, kai af tus nekros, dapsai tus kotu nekros.
Okay, and what's the key word there?
The Greek verb aphes is crucial here. It means to let go, to leave alone, to abandon. It's an urgent active dismissal.
So it's basically follow me and completely abandon the dead to bury their own dead.
Exactly.
And I'm guessing we see that same urgency when this text moved into other regional languages?
We really do. If you look at the ancient Syriac Peshitta, which, by the way, is a dialect of Aramaic, so it's very close to the language Jesus actually spoke.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, the text reads, Shekli question miayun. And the morphological analysis highlights the word shek.
And what does that mean, practically?
It's a really forceful imperative. It doesn't mean gently allow them. It means forsake them. It is an absolute, complete severing of ties.
Okay, so the Greek and the Syriac are both doubling down on this really harsh, direct command. But as I was reading through the source material, I got to the Sahidic Coptic translation.
Ah, yes. The Egyptian text.
Right, which comes out of ancient Egypt and it threw a massive linguistic curveball.
It really does. The Coptic translation is where the door to the real meaning starts to kind of crack open. How did they render the phrase?
Okay, so they translated their own dead as Nuriamum. And according to the linguistic breakdown, that prefix, the re, literally translates to doer.
Right.
So the Coptic translators didn't write, let the dead bury their dead. They wrote, let the dead bury their doers of death.
What's so fascinating here is how that single prefix shifts the entire paradigm. The Coptic translators understood something fundamental about the text.
Which is what?
That Jesus isn't just pointing at passive corpses lying in a tomb. He is describing active participants.
Right. So instead of a passive victim of mortality, a doer of death is an active agent. At first, honestly, my brain went straight to a zombie movie.
A zombie movie.
Yeah, like the infected running around spreading the virus.
I can see that.
But that feels a little too dramatic, right? I was thinking it's probably more like a decaying structural pillar in a building.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, from the outside, it looks like it's doing its job, standing tall. But internally, the concrete is crumbling, the rebar is rusting, and by just existing in that state, it is actively bringing down the structural integrity of everything around it.
That is a brilliant way to frame it. Yeah, the doer of death isn't a Hollywood monster. It's a person whose very operating system is fundamentally aligned with decay rather than vitality.
Wow.
And the Coptic construction tees up the dual nature of the text beautifully. It forces us to realize that this command operates on two parallel tracks. There's a literal physical reality and a massive spiritual paradox.
Okay, I want to tackle the physical reality first because I have to push back here a little bit.
Go for it.
Even with the nuance of doers of death, I still just can't get past how utterly heartless this sounds on a literal level. I mean, a man's father just died. How do we justify a spiritual leader saying, forsake the funeral, let someone else deal with the body?
Yeah, and this raises a really important question about historical context, which is the missing key here.
Okay.
We hear, bury my father, and we think of a modern funeral. A wake on Thursday, a burial on Friday, and you're back to work on Monday.
Right.
But first-century Jewish burial practices were vastly different and incredibly demanding.
So it wasn't just a weekend affair?
Not at all. Burial in that culture was often a two-stage process. When someone died, the body was washed, wrapped, and placed in a niche inside a rock-cut tomb. That was the primary burial.
Okay, that sounds pretty standard.
But the family's duty didn't end there. They would mourn extensively, and then roughly an entire year later, after the flesh had decayed, the family would return to the tomb.
Wait, a whole year?
Full year. They would gather the bones and place them into a small limestone box called an ossuary, and that was the secondary burial.
So when this man says, let me go and bury my father, he might not be asking for a long weekend. He could be asking to delay following Jesus for an entire year to fulfill this societal obligation.
Quite possibly.
Yeah.
Or he's asking to plunge into a highly rigorous, multi-level period of ritual mourning that consumed enormous amounts of time, energy, and social capital.
Wow.
It was considered one of the highest religious duties you could perform. And yet, the theological logic presented in our source material cuts right through that cultural expectation.
How so?
It argues that once physical death has occurred, focusing your energy on the deceased is fundamentally misdirected.
Yeah, and the paper brings in a really stark verse from the Old Testament to back this up. Ecclesiastes 9.0, it talks about Sheol, the ancient Hebrew concept of the grave.
Yes, the Hebrew describes Sheol with absolute uncompromising finality. The phrase is Wagen Wergo Bidaya. It means that in the grave, there is no work, no thought, no knowledge, and no wisdom. It is the ultimate cessation.
So if I'm understanding the theology here, the living cannot alter the eternal destiny of the dead.
Exactly.
No matter how elaborate the funeral is, no matter how many tears you shed or rituals you perform, the dead person's status is permanently locked in.
Yes, that's the core of it.
It makes me think of a student frantically cramming for an exam after the professor has already posted the final grades online. You can sit in the library all night highlighting your textbook. You can stress yourself into a panic attack, but the time for action has completely passed.
And that is why, despite how abrasive it sounds initially, this command is actually deeply liberating.
Liberating?
Yes, because Jesus is freeing this man from the crushing, culturally imposed guilt of thinking he needs to somehow manage the fate of the dead. It is a severe prioritization of human energy.
Right.
The time of the living is breathtakingly brief. Spending your finite, precious hours on rituals for someone whose eternal state is unchangeable is just a tragic misallocation of life.
But, okay, if we aren't supposed to be cramming for a test that is already over, what is the alternative? What is the actual work we are supposed to be doing instead of managing these dead things?
To find that out, we have to look at how Luke recorded this exact same event in chapter 9, verse 60. Matthew gives us the negative command, leave the dead alone. But Luke gives us the positive action.
Right, the other half of the coin.
Exactly. Jesus says, leave the dead to bury their own dead. But as for you, go and proclaim the kingdom of God.
And I was looking at the Greek word used for proclaim there. It's denanzal. And I'm assuming that doesn't just mean quietly handing out a religious flyer on a street corner.
Far from it. Diangel is a present active imperative. It means to broadcast completely, to announce it far and wide everywhere you go.
Oh, it's loud.
It is an ongoing, vibrant, noisy activity. The contrast is intentional. The dead are silent in Sheol, devoid of thought and knowledge. The living, meanwhile, are commanded to be loud, active broadcasters of vitality and life.
Okay, I follow the logic of the physical finality, and honestly, understanding the year-long burial process makes the demand a lot less cruel and a lot more about, urgent priorities.
Yeah, it changes the tone completely.
But, and this is a big but, there's a massive logical flaw staring us in the face if we only read this literally.
Let's hear it.
Let the dead bury their own dead. If we are talking exclusively about physical corpses, the sentence just collapses.
Right.
Because a corpse cannot hold a shovel. A dead body cannot weave a burial shroud or roll a heavy stone in front of a tomb. The people doing the burying, the ones actually organizing the funeral, they have to be physically breathing. So why on earth is Jesus calling the living pallbearers dead?
You've just hit the tripwire of the entire passage.
Oh, awesome.
And that logical impossibility is specifically designed to jolt the listener out of a purely physical mindset. It forces us into the second, more profound layer of meaning, which is the spiritual paradox.
Okay, let's get into that.
The first use of the word dead in that phrase does not refer to a corpse. It refers to a person who has a resting heart rate of 60 beats per minute, who goes to work, who pays taxes, but who is entirely catastrophically dead on a spiritual level.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because Frank Leo points out that this idea of the walking dead wasn't just a clever one-off metaphor that Jesus invented for this specific conversation.
No, not at all.
It is actually a foundational concept baked into the language of the early church. The Apostle Paul uses the exact same Greek word, nekris, to describe living, breathing humans.
He does, yeah. Most notably in his letter to the Ephesians, chapter 2, verse 1, Paul writes to biological humans and says, "You were dead in your trespasses and sins."
Wow.
He is diagnosing a condition where a person is physically animated but completely severed from the divine source of life. By choosing a path of self-interest, sin, and disconnection from God, they become the Coptic doers of death. They are actively constructing their own spiritual tombs.
And the source material highlights another verse from Paul that I think captures this paradox perfectly, 1 Timothy 5:6. Paul is describing a person who is utterly consumed by self-indulgence, living purely for fleeting pleasures.
Yes, and the Greek phrase he uses to describe her is a masterful contradiction. It's zeusa tethnoken.
Zeusa tethnoken. What is the literal translation of that?
Living and dead at the same time. She is biologically living, yet she has already died.
Think about the modern equivalent of that for a second, because this isn't just ancient theology, This is everyday life.
It absolutely is.
We all know someone, maybe it's you, listening to this deep dive right now on your commute. You have a great job, a gym membership, a full calendar, a meticulously curated social media presence that broadcasts how alive you are.
Very common today.
Right. But underneath the hood, the engine has just seized up. You are exhausted, cynical, and completely devoid of any real vibrant purpose. That is exactly what Paul is diagnosing. You are zeusa tethnoken.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it echoes another terrifying verse the paper brings up from Revelation 3.1.
Oh, yeah. What does that one say?
A community is told, you have the reputation of being alive, but you are dead. Your PR is great. Your reality is a graveyard.
Oof. That hits hard.
And to fully grasp the weight of this spiritual deadness, the author links it to one of the most cinematic, haunting visions in the entire Old Testament.
Right.
The prophet Ezekiel, standing in the Valley of Dry Bones.
Ezekiel chapter 37. It is such a visceral image. The prophet is dropped into a valley filled with human skeletons, just completely bleached by the sun.
And we have to remember the context of that vision. It was given to the Israelites during the Babylonian exile. They had lost their homeland, their temple, their identity.
They lost everything.
Right. And they explicitly say in the text, our bones are dried up and our hope is lost. We are indeed cut off. They are biologically alive in Babylon, but spiritually and communally, they are a valley of skeletons.
They are the ultimate dead burying the dead. They're just shuffling around the valley, managing the bones.
Exactly.
But then the narrative shifts dramatically. God doesn't just leave Ezekiel there to stare at the desolation. He tells him to do something impossible.
He commands Ezekiel to prophesy to the bones.
Yeah.
And God makes a specific promise. He says he will cause breath to enter them so they may live.
Breath.
Yeah, the Hebrew word used there is roots. It means wind, breath, or spirit. When translated into the Greek Septuagint, it becomes pneuma zusho, the spirit of life. God is promising a radical, supernatural intervention to reverse the state of Zusha Tethnoken.
And suddenly the bones rattle, sinew and flesh cover them, and the Ryo fills their lungs. They stand up as a vast army of the living.
It's an incredible reversal.
So when we circle back to Jesus standing in front of this grieving man in the first century, when he says, "Follow me," he isn't handing him a new philosophy or a set of moral guidelines.
Precisely not. He is offering the man the breath from Ezekiel's valley.
Wow.
He is standing amidst a culture that is spiritually dormant, exhausted by endless rituals and dead works. And he is saying, I am the Pneuma Jews. Do not stay in the valley of dry bones to manage the skeletons. Let the spiritually dead meticulously arrange the graves. You step out of the graveyard and inhale life.
So what does this all mean when we put the pieces together? We have these two parallel tracks laid out by Frank Leo's research, a fiercely pragmatic command about literal funerals, and a sweeping existential warning about the state of our souls. How do these two things synthesize?
Well, the beauty of this text is that they don't compete, They
Yeah.
complete each other. The synthesis creates a dual liberation.
Okay, unpack that.
On the physical, literal level, it frees us from the tyranny of the past. It removes the false burden that our rituals can somehow manage the eternal state of things that have already ended. It demands that we focus our precious, highly limited energy on the present and the future, on the active broadcasting of the Dayan Gel.
It's the ultimate ruthless prioritization. If you only have a few decades on this planet, don't spend them curating a museum of things that are already over.
Exactly. And on the spiritual level, the text serves as a flashing neon warning sign. It reveals that the default state of humanity, left to its own devices, is to be a doer of death.
Because we just drift.
Right. We are naturally inclined to wander the valley, rearranging the dry bones, mistaking biological existence for true vitality. The physical reality of the cemetery is just a physical mirror reflecting the invisible reality of a soul without the divine breath.
That mirror concept is brilliant. Every time we see a physical burial, it should trigger an internal audit.
Yes.
But the author doesn't leave us stranded in this bleak diagnosis. The antidote is planted at the very beginning of the sentence, before the harsh rebuke even starts.
Akolithe moi, follow me.
In Syriac, it's tabaderi. In Coptic, it's waqtanshu. Across every language, the cure is identical. It is an invitation to active, immediate movement toward the source of life.
It is the only way to break the cycle. If you remain stationary, you will eventually be buried by the doers of death. But if you take that step to follow, you transition from the kingdom of the dead into the ranks of the living.
It's a total shift in reality.
And the source material brings in one final triumphant verse from Ephesians 5.13 that acts as the rallying cry for this entire theological journey.
Oh, I love this one. Give it to us.
Awake, O sleeper, and arise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you.
Awake, O sleeper. I love that because it acknowledges the current state. You were in a coma, you were asleep at the wheel, but it demands an immediate awakening. It is the divine alarm clock ringing in the middle of a graveyard.
It shatters the silence of Sheol. It proves that spiritual death is not a permanent, unchangeable state like physical death. The physical grade might be locked in, but the spiritual exam is still happening right now.
Wow. Okay, we have dug through Greek imperatives, Syriac commands, and Coptic doers of death. We've unpacked first-century burial practices and stood in Ezekiel's valley of dry bones.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We really have. But as we wrap up this deep dive, we have to turn the mirror outward. Because understanding ancient Middle Eastern linguistics is great, but if it doesn't change how you operate tomorrow morning, it's just academic trivia.
That is the crucial pivot. The text is demanding that we audit our own vitality.
Exactly. This ancient, shocking rebuke is actually issuing a deeply personal challenge to you, the listener. It's asking you to ruthlessly evaluate your own life. Are you truly vibrantly alive, filled with the ruah, the breath of life?
Or are you just going through the motions?
Right. Are you living that Zusha Tethnoken existence, living and dead at the exact same time, acting as a doer of death in your own life?
You have to ask yourself, where's your energy going? Are you investing it in proclaiming life? Or are you just meticulously managing a cemetery?
Managing a cemetery. That leads perfectly into the final thought I want to leave you with today. We spent this entire time talking about burying the dead in terms of literal human funerals or massive, sweeping theological metaphors. But zoom in on the micro level of your everyday routine.
Make it personal.
How are the modern, everyday dead things that you are clinging to? I'm talking about the dead-end pursuits, the toxic relationships, the ancient arguments that died years ago but you keep digging up to relitigate.
We all have them.
We do. I'm talking about the lifeless routines, the grudges, or the hollow ambitions that completely drain you of your vitality. How much of your finite, precious energy do you spend desperately trying to manage, dress up, and bury these dead things over and over again?
It's exhausting.
It is. So what would happen if, starting today, you simply decided to drop the shovel? What if you walked away from the graveyard of those dead habits, stepped out of the valley, and actively chose to breathe?